Hi, and welcome to another edition of Ask Lex. I'm Karen Maloney, founder and director of Learning Experts, and today in the hot seat, I'm talking to Josh Humphries from Guroo Producer. Hi, Josh.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. We were having a chat recently about the trap that people fall into with learning and e-learning in particular, which is designing a good course but not the right course. So I think in our industry, we often get caught up with tools and creative ways that we can help people learn. And there's lots of those. But what's often missing in the design of learning solutions is the part where we really dig into the needs of the business and the learner so that we can design the right course instead of the good course or the one that's got all the bells and whistles in it. Now, I know this is something that you're very passionate about, which is where this conversation's come from, and you've been working on it for a long time, even before you started your own business as a learning solutions provider. Now, you've developed a program design methodology that combines elements of action mapping, workplace training, and user experience design, or UX. Can you talk to me a little bit about that methodology?
Sure. So we've created a methodology that we call the Learning Canvas, and it's designed to be used both in a physical format, in a workshop environment, or in a digital format by a learning designer who's working, I guess, independently by themselves or with one or two other people. So the Learning Canvas is essentially, as the name suggests, it's a giant canvas where we get to map out a number of key elements that make up a learning design. Particularly at the high level or initial stages of learning design. So that includes things like business goals, learner personas. So this includes, we've got a learner persona sheet that we break away from on the canvas to look at the backstory of learners, look at what their motivations are, look at their learning environment, the organizational environment, and what sort of capability gaps they might have that map back to those business goals. From each of the personas, we develop a complete picture of what the performance objectives and capabilities are, and we map those to personas, so you get kind of a very basic level capability matrix. We then look at the other side of the fence and have a look at things like program requirements. Program requirements are essentially the constraints that are put on the design by the organization. So that's things like budget, technology. It's really important to get those out in the open early on, because I think a lot of us have been involved in projects where you go to the implementation phase, discover you've done a whole bunch of things that you can't actually action.
Not going to work on their network.
Or not going to meet their budget. Or, a project I was involved in was, we don't have any money for ongoing license fees, even though the solution had ongoing costs. So it's about getting those things out in the open early on and making sure that they're there so that they can guide the design process. Then we look at things like required knowledge or source material. So we, typically start with that last, but often what happens is a person will come to you and go, here's everything I need to teach someone. So that we've got a place to park that when we go back and look at the solution design. And then the final element of the learning canvas is the learning journey, where we map out, and this is the creative part of it, where you get to map out and think about what kind of learning journey you might have. So it combines together sort of a highly analytical approach in terms of the way that we map the goals and the capabilities and the program requirements and the source material, but then it's also highly empathetic in that we use journey mapping and learner personas to get in and understand what the needs of a particular learner are.
Yeah, because sometimes there can just be those like little nuggets of information that you get that just changes the whole approach to the design that you're putting together.
Yeah, and we have a rule that we start with this no matter what. No matter how clear people think the scope is, we start with this process. We execute it at different levels depending on how clear the scope is. So even if everyone thinks that they know what it is, we'll set about documenting using this methodology. And often what you'll discover is there's a bunch of different stakeholders that didn't agree that they thought they agreed once you start to map it out. Or we'll run a full workshop process or multi-workshop process if the scope isn't clear, but we always use the process. It's just a matter of what level we use it at.
Yeah. Do you find that you get much kickback from clients when you sort of say this? Because I know, like, over the years when I've done projects, people think that they kind of did like some learning needs analysis a couple of years ago and they've got the data that they need to give you. Like, how difficult is it, or are people more open to this way of working now?
To be honest, the name helps with that. So it sounds like part of the creative process, which it is. So I think letting needs analysis sounds a bit sort of old school and tech and consulting-y.
Yes.
So by giving it the name that we gave it, it makes it position it as part of the design process, the initial part. And we always say, look, we need to do at least a basic level of this so that we understand what your problem is. We don't want to go off and do the wrong thing.
Absolutely.
The program requirements also help a lot with that, because no matter how much that people position that they have a specific solution in place, we still need to understand their business in order to deliver to their environment and understand their learners in the writing process. So it's pretty easy to position it because it's got those other elements to it that aren't just about capability mapping.
Yeah. And so when you've gone through this process, what's the end? What's the outcome of that process? Is it a document, or is it?
Yeah, sure. So when we do it in the physical environment, we obviously have a whole bunch of artifacts. So we have a giant canvas with lots of Post-it notes over it.
Yep.
And we have
Post-it notes.
built some personas as well. So we usually do that collaboratively in the workshop. So we have the personas, we get other people to help craft those for us. And then we have a learning journey mapped out as well. So they're the kind of artifacts. We then have a digital version of that we can input all of this information into, right, and add that extra mapping as a next level. So for example, mapping the personas to the performance objectives and the capabilities, and the personas to the different learning activities, because in a workplace environment particularly, not every learner persona gets every piece of every learning activity. So that is something that's a little hard to do on paper. It can be
it's already making me been thinking about it.
But we've done it that's why we created the digital version. So what comes out of that when we transfer it into the digital version is actually a scope document. So we take all of that creative thinking and mapping and we push a button and it creates a Word document which has a scope that we can send off to various stakeholders. Right. And that's, while it's certainly not critical to run the creative part of the process, for us, that's what's allowed us to, I guess, democratize the process a little, because the technology creates enough constraints around the process and enough guidance around the process that any learning designer in our team can use it and produce a consistent outcome for all of our customers. Which I think was one of the main reasons we moved to this methodology, other than wanting to have a process that we could follow to make sure we were doing the right thing for each of our customers. The other reason was to enable the scaling of the solution design process. Too often, and particularly in the last business I worked in, it was kind of a mystical art that only one or two people in the organization could go in and understand the customer's needs.
Everybody.
Yeah, and so that's what we wanted to change, was if we came up with this process and we could, this canvas and design process, plus add the extra element of the mapping technology on it, we could actually put that ability in the hands of even our most junior learning designers to actually run a process that helped them understand what the real needs were.
Okay, fantastic. Did you think about the benefits of that process and just breaking it down just to summarize for learners and the business and solution designers? So for the learners, what do they get out of it?
Well, the learners get the appropriate learning.
The right course, not the good course.
They get, they also get something that's aligned to their sort of learning environment. So for example, in a retail setting, we uncover through the persona process when they can do the learnings. That might determine the length and format of it. Obviously, we also look at their motivations of why they would do it. So for the learners, it's obviously creating an outcome that aligns their needs to the business's needs.
Okay. And for the business, obviously, they get something that's going to work for them. But also, I would imagine that gives them a good sort of clear picture of what's going to happen. I mean, I think probably one of the hardest things in the creative process is trying to get across your vision for a design to a business and how that's going to implement.
Yeah, and they also get
affect them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they get a much better understanding of what we're going to do, but it also gives them stakeholder alignment. So just running through the process with everyone that's involved in these large organizations, it's like everyone's on the same page, even if the solution was, already sort of scoped out at the beginning, and it inevitably changes through the conversation that they had. So they get alignment, and interestingly, they get a much easier to digest document that explains what the course is about. It's interesting. One of our customers actually had us go back and retrospectively create canvases for existing programs, because it was an easy place for them to go and see what each of their programs was about.
Okay, that's really interesting, actually, kind of like reverse engineering it and thinking.
Yeah, but it was certainly an interesting process to go through. And in reality, you then start to uncover gaps. So there also comes a future opportunity.
Yeah. And what about for us as learning designers, learning solution designers? Like, how does that help? I mean, obviously, it's going to give us more information to be able to design a better solution.
A common language to work off, particularly across an organization and with your clients. So therefore, for within an organization of learning designers, one person can pick up a project partway through or assist with a project because everybody is using the same terminology to design their programs. It's really easy to go back in. I mean, the personas are very powerful because throughout the whole design process, we can refer back to them and depersonalize decisions. So would this particular learner actually benefit from this decision? So it creates a place to come back to throughout the detailed design process in order to, I guess, justify decisions or bring the project back on track when, sometimes the big shiny thing comes up halfway through the project and you get distracted, and it's a good point to come back to and go, actually, we have a scope. We also have some personas to help us make decisions as we go. And those decisions are wrapped up in objectives, a high-level journey, and these personas. So it's a very powerful tool to keep things on track.
Because we love a shiny thing in L&D, don't we?
We do. And it's, it basically helps you get to the point of where you're creating something that's just enough.
Just enough. I like that. That. Have you got any tips for people doing this for the first time? Because it sounds, it's like a really interesting process, but it can be a bit overwhelming for somebody if it's not the way they're used to working. How would you break it down?
Yeah, sure. So if you were running it for a project, the first thing I would do is probably practice with it and doing the retrospective thing that I mentioned.
Okay.
It's good to go back and just see how you would map out one of your existing programs to this process as a practice run. If you're actually running it in a workshop environment for the first time, there's a few things that I would do. Firstly, you got to make sure the right people are in the room. And to do that, I always have a warm-up meeting with the sponsor. To get their expectations and make sure that you guide the workshop in line with those expectations. That's not to say that you can't take a left or right turn within the workshop, but it's always good to make sure that you have the sponsor on board for the process, and that you also understand their high-level expectations before you get into it. And when I say the right people in the room, that doesn't mean everyone. So one of the things that we often do, depending on the nature of the project, is we sometimes don't include the technical people in the workshop, because if the organization's technical flexibility is so locked down and their environment is so locked down that there isn't actually much you can do to be creative in the technology side, you might as well have a separate meeting with their LMS people or whoever it is to document those requirements first, so that you don't go off on, so the whole workshop doesn't come about what you can't do. Which is often what happens in a situation. If there is technical flexibility and that you can look at new technologies and stuff, obviously you bring those people into the workshop. But it's always good to have representatives of the learner. Many of my projects in using this process where the sponsor has been very clear about what they want, the projects change once we've got representatives of the learner in there. It doesn't always have to be an actual learner. It's often best that it's either someone that's previously been through a similar program, or a frontline manager that has to manage people that are in that particular role. They tend to have some great insights, and inevitably they're the person that ends up doing most of the speaking in the workshop, because they're actually on the ground. And you need to be prepared for the unexpected is my other thing that I would say. One of the other things that often comes out of that process once you bring those people into the room is what people thought best practice was is actually not what's going on. So you need to be prepared to deal with that when it pops up.
Okay.
Be prepared to, I guess, in some ways put the sponsor on the spot and go, okay, are we creating a program around the new best practice, or are we creating best practice based on what people are actually doing? So you need to be prepared for those kinds of moments that pop up and the unexpected things, and be able to think on your feet. And it's okay not to do the journey mapping in the workshop. If you're not confident yet to go away and be creative on the spot, typically you'll do the analysis of the need in the workshop, maybe get some initial ideas from the sponsor on the journey mapping, but then go away and think about what the solution might look like in the learning journey mapping, and then present that back to the group for feedback. So breaking into those two steps would be the other recommendation.
Okay. All right. Well, you're lucky enough that you've put all of this into a system, and that's something that you use with your people and work with your clients. But you've also been very, very, very generous in actually developing the Learning Canvas workshop toolkit for anybody who wants to have a go with this. So I'll put a link to the video underneath the video where everybody can download this. But you just want to talk us through what you've put into the toolkit.
Sure. So we'll put a physical version of the canvas that you can print out to put up on, I guess, a wall and put your Post-it notes on. Some persona templates. We'll have a sample workshop agenda in there as well, and I guess a workshop process for when you need to do the multi-step process. So where you have multiple meetings, we'll put that in there as well. And we'll put some a journey mapping template and some sample learning journeys in there as well.
Awesome. Well, so if anybody wants to have a go with that, then click the link below and get stuck in with the downloads. I'll also put a link, Josh, if it's okay, to your LinkedIn profile and your website, if anybody wants to get in touch with you to discuss further. Thanks very much for sharing. I appreciate that.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me.